Amanda and Abram Cleag were among the earliest African American families here in Long Beach. We've told Abram's story before, but knew nothing about Amanda or their lives beyond what was in his obituary. That changed this year thanks to a genealogist named Kristen Cleag and her website, which held an incredible amount of information about the Cleag plantations in Tennessee. It was wonderful getting to know Kristen and her blog, which contains fascinating profiles about the people and their descendants. Her website address is in your program. It's in an ad with a headline that says more than 200 years of the Cleag family history. I guarantee you'll enjoy reading it. In addition to what we learned from our website, Kristen helped us access nearly 120 documents related to Abram's disability pension. Imagine reading a deposition from 1909 and finding Amanda's recollection of Sherman's army arriving at the Cleag plantation in Tennessee. We also discovered newspaper articles that read like a novel. Everything about the Cleag's lives turned out to be surprisingly dramatic and very interesting. Our historian, Dr. Kay Brigel, reminds us how unusual it is and how fortunate we are to have so much information about an early African American family. Among other things today, you'll hear about Abram's job at City Hall in 1908. The photo of it is displayed here is from our book entitled A Step Back in Time. It's filled with photos and stories about early Long Beach, including the first City Hall. You can find it in the merchandise tent over there by the fence. Telling the Cleag story is Zadie Cannon. Zadie is a retired Long Beach city auditor. She holds a master's degree in accounting and business. Since retiring, Zadie has appeared in commercials, Disney specials, and is a card-carrying member of the two largest actor unions. Zadie is a wonderful actress and a loving grandmother who says her greatest joys are her grandchildren. The presentation is entitled Amazing But True.
Ooh. Welcome. I'm Amanda Cleag. My husband Abram rests here beneath this stone. We were born about 1840 on the Cleag family plantation in Athens, Tennessee. We were slaves. The Cleags grew wheat, oat, and rye on their land. They worked us hard. To them, we were no different than the horses. They got wealthy from our labor and gave us meager food and shelter. Time has not erased my memories, nor my anger. In 1860, my mother's name was Sally. My father's name was Clinton. Abram's father was Jim Hurst. I didn't know his mother, but between us, we had 20 siblings. In 1863, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Now plantations were isolated places, and we didn't know what was coming. Soldiers from General Sherman's Union Army rode onto the Cleag plantation. The Cleags refused to sign an oath of allegiance to the United States. Right then and there, they became prisoners of war. We were free. As a slave, Abram never had a say-so or choice about anything. Now he could leave the plantation and help join in the fight against the Confederacy. He joined the Union Army's 1st Regiment U.S. Colored Heavy Artillery. I needed to find a job and a place to live. I went to work for a family in town, the Tuckers. Later, I married Lou Diedrich. Now, we all make mistakes. Lou was mine. Some days he beat me, others he threatened to kill me. And in between, he fathered our child. In 1865, the Confederate Army surrendered to the Union Army. The war was over, and 9 months later, Abram mustered out in Chattanooga. The Army paid him what he was due, and he returned to Athens. Abram saw what was happening to me, but he didn't meddle. And I knew eventually that Lou was going to kill me. So I went to court to get a divorce. Witnesses testified that my life was in danger. And in 1867, just before Christmas, the judge decreed me a single woman. He gave me custody of our child and told Lou to pay the court and lawyer fees. Sadly, soon after, my child died. Well, Abram asked me to marry him, and we took the train to Chattanooga. My father had a little restaurant there. A preacher came and married us right there in the restaurant. The Tuckers, the family I had worked for, they were moving to Texas and told us that we could come along with them. Abram and I rented land in Austin and settled down. We planted and harvested and sold our crops and saved our money. In 1876, our daughter was born. We named her Sarah, but we called her Sally. My mother took the train to come and visit and to see her grandbaby. A few years later, we had another child, but that child died. In the 1880s, Austin was starting to slow down, and we were looking for another place to go. And we had heard about California and that California was booming, that they had land and people with money to invest. So we headed west. California had never been a slave state, but there was prejudice. Not gonna say otherwise. Yet and still, California did feel different. Mostly there were white people, but there were Chinese, Japanese, Mexicans, Filipino, and black people like us who came here from the South. Abram found work as a laborer, and we wanted to have a say in how things were gonna go. Now, it was hard for a black man to vote in the South, but we weren't in the South anymore. And it would be another 30 years before I could vote. But I was so happy to go with Abram and watch him register in 1888. We were attending the Second Baptist Church in Los Angeles. Now, the war had left Abram with ailments. He had kidney problems, back problems. He always had a cough, and sometimes he couldn't catch his breath. In 1893, he filed for his disability pension. He still had to work, but that was Abram. He wasn't gonna stop working. Our daughter Sally, when she was 14, she got married. Her husband was 32. He was a carpenter. His name was Richard Pierce. Now, Abram and I had our misgivings, but Sally was determined, and we were relieved when they decided to live with us. Before long, they had a baby girl, and they named her Avalon. And Abram and I were over the moon in love with our granddaughter. Then Sally started to run around. Her husband, Richard, caught her in what you'd call a compromising situation. Richard shot at Sally's lover, but he missed. 6 months later, she gave birth to a stillborn baby. Now, Abram and I thought maybe that would straighten her out, but Sally wouldn't settle down. She took up with a guy named Romeo Brown. Romeo was a pimp and an opium dealer. He was bad news behind a handsome face. And one night, Richard followed the two of them to a bar, and Richard shot at Romeo, and he missed. Again. Richard was not a good shot. If he had been, Romeo would have been dead. He chased Romeo out of the bar, and the bullet had only grazed him in the leg. Well, Sally, she moved to San Francisco out of the watchful eye of Abram and me. And we were raising Avalon. And Abram had found a job at City Hall in Long Beach. He was a janitor there. The church we were attending, Second Baptist Church in Los Angeles, the preacher had known people in City Hall and had recommended Abram for the job. And we wanted to move from Los Angeles. We kind of had blamed it on Sally's wild ways. So we moved to Long Beach and we bought a house on 11th Street near the new mission that the church was opening here in Long Beach. There were now enough black people in Long Beach to open up a mission here. We had cool ocean breezes, and best of all, it was dry. No alcohol sales, no bars. In 1893, Abram filed for his pension. So he still worked. April 14, 1908, Abram woke up feeling poorly, but he insisted on going to work anyway. So Avalon and I went along to help. Abram decided to sit down to rest. Someone called the doctor, but before the doctor got there, Abram had died. I had known him my whole life. We had been happily married for over 40 years. And his death was such a big thing that they put it right in the middle of the front page. It talked about Abram's life and how everyone at City Hall loved him. They took up a collection and paid for the flowers and the funeral and for the headstone that used to sit right there. Sometime after Abram had passed, Avalon came down with tuberculosis, and it turned into pneumonia. I was holding her hand when she died at the age of 15. Now, I had no time to grieve. I had to find work, so I found work as a maid, and I stayed in our house until 1911. I had kept in touch with people in Austin, and they had convinced me to come back. So I went back and I stayed for a couple years. But what I really needed was my family. So I moved back to Tennessee and worked as a laundress. I was well into my 80s now. In the summer of 1921, when I was visiting my sister Lydia in Memphis, I fractured my leg. It was a bad fracture, and they took me to the hospital. But my kidneys failed, and I was gone. Abram and I, we had a good life together, and we saw heartache, and we saw joy. And I'll tell you, joy is better any day. I want to thank you for coming out and listening to our story, and thank you for supporting the Long Beach Historical Society.